I might as well just let you cook on the big, beautiful bill and what you make of it.
It has something for every part of the American political spectrum to hate.
In this video, Tim Miller of the Bulwark has on Pete Buttigieg to talk about the, quote, big, beautiful bill, unquote. Now, Tim Miller and Pete Buttigieg had an hour-long conversation. You can watch that whole thing on the Bulwark. This is one small piece of it. I've done another video. Pete Buttigieg is terrific and has great insights. And of course, Tim Miller does a terrific job at what he does. Why don't we watch this together? I'll have some opinions to add, and then I want to know what you think in the comments.
So for conservatives, there's the fact that it explodes the deficit and the debt even more. One thing that I take seriously from the conservative perspective is the idea that we have to be more responsible about the debt, especially as it's, once you cross that 100% debt to GDP ratio and you add to it, especially because part of why we've been able to get away with that much debt is the rock solid reputation for political and economic stability that the U.S. has enjoyed. Obviously, that's got some holes in it. So not a great time to be adding trillions to the debt. So I think conservatives can see how disturbing that is. Meanwhile, most Americans and definitely most liberals don't love the tax cuts for the rich that are in there, which is part of why there is such a big debt and deficit. And then you got something that is especially disturbing to liberals, but again, I think the whole country gets, at least most of the country gets, which is that kicking 8 million Americans off of health insurance on purpose is a bad idea. It's wrong, and it's going to make America less healthy, and it doesn't make any sense. Especially when we know that the reason that they're doing it is partly to fund these tax cuts for the wealthiest. So, this is not incredibly complicated, even though a budget bill can fundamentally be very complicated. The facts here are simple. The fact is, cutting taxes for the wealthy, destroying health insurance for millions of Americans, and adding to the debt while you're at it is bad policy, and I think it's bad politics, but it's up to those of us who stand in opposition to make sure there's actually a political penalty for getting on board with this sort of thing.
Yeah, I kind of think it's insane policy and politics, actually. I truly don't, I kind of don't understand it. I was talking to John Chait on Friday, and he was like, Tim, you just were blinded by the fact that your whole life, tax cuts for the rich is a religion among the Republicans, and so they don't need to rationalize it anyway. And so maybe that's true. Why? Why do you think that they have put forth, this is the only thing they're going to pass this year? And it goes in direct conflict to what we're about to talk about with regards to the politics of this country, about how they are purportedly pivoting to being a more working class oriented party. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's terrible for working class Americans on every level, whether we talk about, because take the debt, which sounds like very abstract, right?
Yeah.
But working Americans who are hoping to buy their first home are among those who are most going to be paying the bill for the tax cuts for the rich, not just because the tax burden moves, but because you're going to be seeing that likely in the form of interest rates, right? To say nothing of Medicaid. One really important thing to point out about Medicaid, we're talking about a lot of people who any given month might fall out of the work requirements, not because they did anything wrong, not because they stopped working, but because they don't get enough hours that week or that month. And working class Americans in particular understand that vulnerability, that you don't get to set your own schedule and you don't always get the hours. To have that not only mean you're losing wages, but also that you're threatened with being kicked off of your healthcare. Frankly, it goes to the almost caricature version of the worst of old school Republicans versus the thing I most respect about old school Republicans, which is the extent to which they talked and cared about liberty.
Yeah, let's I was saving this. I had a Tim used to be a Republican policy section at the end of the podcast. So we'll just do it right now. Are we negative? Are we going to finally negatively polarize Democrats into really talking about the debt and deficit a lot? It is it has been an issue that I'm sure I'll just preempt your answer for me, which is that Bill Clinton handled this better than any Republicans did. But the debt went up significantly under Biden. We're paying a huge amount now in interest on the debt. That's going to balloon significantly more after this bill, especially if interest rates stay high. And that's going to mean that the government can't fund things that are progressive priorities. And yet, Democrats sometimes will talk about it if they get asked about it on a news show, but it doesn't feel like it's been really an animating issue for Democrats for a while. Do you think that might change?
Look, Democrats I think allergy to talking about the debt mostly comes from it having been used as an excuse to not make investments that we believe in. But yeah, now we've made enormous investments in the last few years in roads, highways, bridges, research, chips, all kinds of infrastructure. Some of that being at risk of being rolled back, but we've made massive investments. Those are the kinds of deficit spending that economists would say make sense in the same way that it makes sense to take out a loan to build your business.
That's true. Some debt is not a bad thing, but it is out of control. And somehow the Republicans have weaponized it to make it seem like it's the Democrats that are the spenders and the Republicans that are fiscally conservative. But there is nothing fiscally conservative about this bill.
But what we're talking about now is watching the mounting debt grow and adding to it with a massive tax cut for the rich. And to your point, one reason I think it makes sense right now for Democrats to get more comfortable talking about deficits and the debt is that, as a rule, we've been better at handling it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, both parties have added to the national debt in spectacular fashion. But
we're grading on a curve. You made it to Harvard, Pete.
Yeah,
we're not. You didn't.
Well, look, I mean, if you look at who's shown the best results of getting the deficit under control, or even at certain points running a surplus, it ain't Republicans. So Democrats should own that.
Onto the Harvard of it all. I'm going to steel man the other side of the argument for this, because I went to a safety school. You went to Harvard. Maybe you can speak to its value a little bit more. And it's, should Harvard be getting all this money from the federal government anyway? And shouldn't Harvard be paying taxes? I mean, they have a huge, what is the line that Scott Galloway uses? It's a hedge fund that has a college put on top of it. Like, should the government be underwriting Harvard anymore? Do the MAGAs have a point on this?
So a couple things. First of all, when we're talking about this research funding, this isn't paying Harvard money that they get to just sit on. This is, in effect, hiring Harvard to solve problems. So when we've got funding, especially funding that goes to things like cancer research or preventing veteran suicide, which I believe was in the scope of one of the contracts that was put on the chopping block. I think that one was Harvard. We're talking about using the resources and the brainpower at that university or any of the other universities that compete for federal funding to address problems that make the American people better off. It's not about what can the federal government do for the university. It's about what value can the university bring the taxpayer, because it turns out not just anybody can do some of the incredibly complex research, whether we're talking about what goes on at the medical school or physics or a whole lot of other things. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I think is really important is we're not talking about some clear-eyed analytical assessment of the value we're getting for contracts. I would be on board with that, right? If you're saying, like, look, we're funding all this research, but we need to be more rigorous about how much of that research is actually getting results. I think that makes total sense. But of course, this isn't happening because of anything related to benefiting the American taxpayer. This is happening because of politics. And if we become the kind of country where a university is dismantled because it doesn't line up with the politics of the man who happens to be in charge of the government, we cannot possibly be the world's leading nation.
Oh my God, of course not. On its face, right? This administration and the Republicans that support it, which actually seem to be all of them, it's just rip and run, right? It's literally composed of billionaires. This bill is about making permanent and increasing tax cuts for the rich. There's no plan of governance. They say we're going to, lower the price of eggs or whatever they're doing. Clearly, that's not working. It's all about enriching Trump. And everybody thinks, I can scoop up some of the gold that falls out of his pockets along the way. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's certainly not a long-term plan for improving the lives of Americans or increasing, America's leadership around the world.
All right, our smug vice president has a counterpoint to you on this, so I'm going to read you his tweet. He says that there's an extraordinary reproducibility crisis in the sciences, where most published papers fail to replicate. Universities have massive bureaucracies. The voting patterns of university professors resemble North Korea. Many universities explicitly engage in racial discrimination against whites and also Asians. Our universities could see the policies of the Trump administration as a necessary corrective, or they could yell fascism. What do you say to the vice president?
It's just ideological gibberish. I'm sorry, but like, what does it mean to vote like North Korea? Do they even vote in North Korea? Like, what is he talking about? This is ideological gibberish meant to justify an ideological war on American universities. Look, is there frustration with the academy? Sure. I mean, I feel that. I would love, as somebody who believes in the relationship between big ideas and policies and politics, I actually believe that academia and American universities could be doing much better when it comes to developing ideas that benefit people. I actually think this is worse on the left. And what I mean by that is the right, because they felt that there was a powerful liberal bias in universities, built this extraordinarily rich constellation of think tanks over the last 50 years that aren't just worrying about things like the optimal healthcare subsidy from a conservative perspective. They're worried about things like, what is the nature of liberty? And meanwhile,
also totally random stuff like, whether we're producing enough sperm in our young men.
Obviously their priorities are not exactly my priorities, right? But my point is they're thinking about everything from the biggest of the big questions to very specific policy things. And that's how you get stuff like Project 2025, a very thoroughly thought through plan, which I hate, but which is connecting their first principles as they see them to their political agenda. Meanwhile, on the left, whether we're talking about the think tank world or whether we're talking about universities, there's think tanks that I think are tending to focus on things that are much more narrow, specific and rather technical policy questions. And there's universities that are doing a lot of like theories about theories that can get frustratingly abstract. So I get all of that. That doesn't mean that it's okay for the government to go to war with the university because they don't like their politics, or for the government to be watching the voting. Why is the Vice President of the United States commenting on the voting habits of anybody, any student or faculty member, in the context of whether federal funding should be going to help prevent veteran suicide in a research project at the medical school there? Why is that his problem?
The answer, of course, is obvious, as Pete Buttigieg knows very well, is that it's not about governance. It's about authoritarianism. I think Pete Buttigieg, very smart guy, makes many, many excellent points. Sometimes what I wish I could see a little bit more from Pete Buttigieg is some teeth. I certainly don't want him to be a bully. I don't think that's the cloth of which he is cut. But Pete Buttigieg is so calm and so mature and so focused on good governance that sometimes there does need to be a little bit of a clap back. And on the one end of the spectrum, you've got a Jasmine Crockett who can sass it up. And AOC can also give back as good as she gets. And I think that other people in the squad are doing that. But sometimes I think you need to call it out explicitly. And sometimes the language which that merits isn't always as polite as Pete Buttigieg is. So let me know what you think in the comments. Are you fans of Pete Buttigieg? What do you think of my analysis of him? What about Tim Miller? You think Tim Miller is doing a good job interviewing here? I recommend this whole interview. It's an hour long. It's on the Bulwark. You should check it out. Let me know what you think in the comments.